Today is a cool topic. Today, something I've been wanting to speak about. It's analyzing literature through a psychoanalytic lens. So, through the lens of psychology. What I mean by this is that you might be able to decipher some sort of meaning that the author didn't initially intend, or even is aware that he has put into the book, a certain meaning that he is unconscious of. And therefore, the author is just like any other person and has a conscious and an unconscious. And I am familiar with the fact that Sigmund Freud would do this with other works of art. I think he even speaks about different works of art in this light, in the psychoanalytic lens, and other works of literature. And sometimes the author does know what he's doing and intends this, and how much you know this, how much is obvious that they are intending to say what they're intending to say. Sometimes it is more obvious than others, and sometimes it isn't. So whether that's the case or not, I have definitely noticed this in The Great Gatsby. I've noticed that a lot of people who review it will review it in its superficial outline, and also get like stuff that the author very clearly and very obviously intended to say and speak about. And this usually is stuff like the American dream, like, oh, Fitzgerald was speaking about the American dream with The Great Gatsby, or Fitzgerald was speaking about the shallowness of the American dream, or the shallowness of the American culture in wanting shiny things and luxury and money and stuff of that nature. In a way, you could even say that really, which is something that I haven't necessarily encountered, which is the fact that F. Scott Fitzgerald was probably speaking even of the shallowness of romance itself, of just the idea of romance, of romantic love. Whether he was conscious of that or not, he really pinpointed that very well in this book. Because the reason I say that too is because Fitzgerald, if you read anything about his life, you realize that this man was very attached to, seems like he was very much a romantic character, a romantic person. Whether he was aware of the shallowness of just romantic love or not is not something that I know of or not, or whether he woke up to that. I know he was a very smart guy, so I mean, it's possible. Maybe he was intending that very much in this novel, but I haven't heard that spoken about yet. Another thing is the fact that a lot of people just really, as I already mentioned, they get caught up with the outlines of the novel, of the American dream, of all this kind of stuff. And I don't think that that's the main center focus of the novel per se. And whether that is something that, F. Scott Fitzgerald intended to be the main focus doesn't really matter when you're reading a work of art, or when you analyze somebody, for instance. Just to give an introduction to psychoanalysis, is the fact that somebody could be speaking on the other side and be saying stuff, and they're intending to give out a certain message, or speak about something, or unravel something, and yet they have no idea that they're actually saying a lot that they're not intending to say. And a lot of hidden stuff, a lot of hidden meaning that they're not intending to say comes out and is able to be assorted and thought about and brought to their conscious awareness. So in a sense, that is what psychoanalysis is in a very simplified nutshell. And so in that sense, everybody, could be psychoanalyzed in a way. And I mean, if you're able to do this with authors, or if you could do this with literature, or see past into their own characters, or just the work of art, the characters themselves can be psychoanalyzed. And I am not attempting to psychoanalyze anybody here, or Fitzgerald, or the characters, but just trying to think about it as an original and I wouldn't say it's original, but think about it as an interesting light, an interesting lens, an interesting perspective in which to look at literature that just makes it more rich and interesting. So on to the next subject would be, which is, encapsulating that subject, would be, this novel is much more character driven than anything plot wise, or any, sort of meaning that somebody was trying to say about the American dream, or about this or that, or this subject, or moralizing about that, or saying that this, the main subject really of the book is just the character. That's why it is eponymous. Eponymous means that it bears the character's name, the Great Gatsby, and the entire novel could be seen through the character of the Great Gatsby, and it is such a unique character, such a special character, such a unique character in literature. Daisy is very important in this whole equation as well. She's a very important character in this equation, but obviously not as important as the Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is the real equation, and not the American people, not the American culture, and not the American dream, but the Great Gatsby himself. Jay Gatsby is the center focus of the theme of this novel. And I think that people just, sometimes it goes in and over their heads when in the reviews that I've seen, at least, they mention so many other things, and they kind of like just skim over the Great Gatsby, which is very ironic because that's what the whole novel's about. And at the end of it, you see how people forget him, and people go off with their lives. And I think, I don't want to paraphrase, but I am doing that now. Fitzgerald mentions the fact that people were heartless, like Daisy and her husband were heartless and kind of like just left off their problems and moved somewhere else and forgot about their cares, or stuff like that. So in that sense, you could just read the whole novel and try to see what Fitzgerald was trying to say or something like that, or try to mention some cultural, political, or some other kind of like peripheral subject or peripheral theme of the novel, instead of actually focusing on the eponymous character that bears its own name, Jay Gatsby. So I've noticed that a lot of people don't speak about him when they're reviewing the novel. So that's kind of what I want to do justice to now. When you're looking at Jay Gatsby, there are similarities between the Great Gatsby and Jay Gatsby and Fitzgerald himself, if you read a lot about him. Especially his first book, I believe it is... in a sense, you could even view it as Fitzgerald's alter ego is the Great Gatsby. And you really could get this essence, or this kind of like notion, if you read his first novel, This Side of Paradise, in which it's mostly or very much autobiographical in a sense. I'm not sure how much of it is autobiographical, but I read this book a long time ago, a very long time ago. But I do remember that there was a huge aspect of it that was autobiographical of Fitzgerald's time in the university in Princeton. The book's written in a first-person narrator, so you really get a little bit closer to the character, and since it's autobiographical in that sense, you get a little bit closer to Fitzgerald. And what I'm trying to see here is the fact that The Great Gatsby is not exactly autobiographical, though there's a lot of autobiographical things here, just like the fact where Fitzgerald's wife did not want to marry him, Zelda, because he was not rich or had a stable job or any means or anything like that. And that was very important, which, I mean, it always is throughout time, but it was something that was so important to her and through that time that she didn't actually accept to marrying him until he published his first work. So she kind of like needed this sort of validation of him to be able to feel secure in marrying him. So in that sense, that story, that personal story of Fitzgerald's life, is very much assimilated with The Great Gatsby if you're able to see that. And I think that it's hard not to see that once you know that. So Gatsby, right? So who is Gatsby? What is Gatsby? Why is he interesting? Why is psychoanalysis brought up here? And it's just the fact that he is a very interesting character. He's very seldom seen in life or in society at large. I guess you could be termed, I'm not sure what the psychological term for him would be necessarily, or what, his neurosis is. I don't know what the psychological term would be for Jay Gatsby's archetype or something like that, or like Jay Gatsby, or like his psychological conundrum or whatever. But I would say maybe it has something to do with egotism. His very, very strong egotistic character, Gatsby is. He's very self-centered in a way that's not just self-centered in the way that most people are, because everyone's self-centered, but there's a particular way in which Gatsby is self-centered. And it's completely different than just any other man, you know what I mean? He's very special in that sense. And I think specialness is exactly the right word here, where the whole green light theory, the whole like Gatsby would see a green light and have this eternal hope, or this hope that things would go well. And the reason why he would have this hope isn't like some positivity. It wasn't positive thinking that was driving Jay Gatsby, or that he was dreaming about, or that, you know, was the main center focus of his psychology or thought. But rather, the green light was more of a hope or an idea that it was him. It was because he was Dre Gatsby that good things would happen to him, that somehow he would come out on top, that he would triumph, that he would get the girl, that somehow she would see that she would see what he saw in himself, the way that he saw himself, this magnificent creature, this, you know, glamorous, beautiful, interesting man. She would see this. And he had this undying hope that things would go well and that someone would see this. He needed one person. And you see this entire need in the entire novel, where Gatsby kind of needs people to see him in this light. He wants people to see him in this light. And there's a lot of boasting. There's a lot of self-aggrandizement whenever he's speaking to anybody. You particularly see this desire and this want that Gatsby has for people to see him the way that he sees himself, in this hopeful vision of himself. In the narrator, Nick Carraway, you see this, that he attaches himself to this person. This becomes a special person to him, because Nick Carraway is also, you know, I'm not speaking about Nick Carraway here, though there's a lot of stuff to say about him. This is why this is such a well-rounded novel. I don't know how someone could read this and go uninterested, which I've seen, or people like not like the novel. It's such a, more than anything, the psychology of the characters are so vivid, and there's so much psychology in the book, and the characters are so interesting that, I mean, that's the thing for me. And I think that a huge part of reading, or that makes a novel is really the characters and their psychology. I mean, the plot it could be okay, or like the writing, or like the whole like author's, you know, high lofty ideas, or like some sort of, you know, life experience that matches with yours. That's great and dandy. That's amazing. I mean, that's the best thing. That's my favorite thing. But if you can't really see just a character's psychology as interesting, just because it doesn't match with yours, or just because you can't really put yourself in their shoes, it doesn't, you know, you should expand that ability of yours, maybe the empathy side, or who knows what. But I mean, this novel is interesting in the regard of the characters, for sure, more than anything. All right, just to show this desire and this want for people to see him for, you know, his greatness and this kind of like special side, I'll tell you God's truth. His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America but educated at Oxford, because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It's a family tradition. He heard the phrase, educated at Oxford, or swallowed it, or choked on it, as though it had bothered him before. And with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money. His voice was solemn, as if the memory of that sudden extinction of a clan still haunted him. After that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that happened to me long ago. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die. I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when it began. I took 2 machine gun detachments so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Louis guns, and when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of dead. I was promoted to be a major, and every allied government gave me a decoration, even Montenegro. He reached in his pocket, and a piece of metal slung on a ribbon fell into my palm. That's the one from Montenegro. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. Orderi di Danilo ran the circular legend. Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it, Major J. Gatsby, I read, for valor extraordinary. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody, you see? I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. Sorry for that lengthy passage there, but I'm trying to, make it obvious that here the entire thing that is very central is Great Gatsby's self-aggrandizement, his ego, his need for people to see him the way that he sees himself. So he gets Nick Carraway, the only person who would really listen to him, the only person who, for some reason, right, he's an interesting character because he's the only one who really buys into his story, who starts seeing him with fascination, and yet there's still some cold attachment to him, but there is this depth of understanding that Nick Carraway is able to have, this empathy that other, either Americans or characters in the book are incapable of having with him, yet he is. And so that's why Gatsby, opens his heart to him. But you see that Gatsby is still just very boastful, very self-aggrandizing. He needs someone to see him this way, and that's why he keeps this conversation or this open door with Nick Carraway, perhaps. So there's this sense in which Gatsby needs himself to feel there's this specialness, this individual romanticized specialness to him that separates him from other men, and that's what he believes, and he wants other people to see this. So the entire purpose of the novel you see here is the Great Gatsby. You see how it's very centered on him. And Daisy is kind of peripheral. She's an important character, but you realize that whether Gatsby loved Daisy or didn't isn't necessarily a major theme in the novel. It isn't something super important, and he did probably, in a way, right? But it could have been any other woman. It wasn't necessary that that Gatsby was doing all this because he needed Daisy and he loved her so much, and the depths of his love were so powerful that it wasn't about that. You realize here that it was Gatsby needed Daisy to see him like this. That's what he loved about her, because she had fallen in love with him, and he wanted her. He wanted her to see him that way again, with his beautiful shirts and his mansion and his house and all this, and to impress her, to really, drive the message home that he was this man who she fell in love with, this unique and special individual who was absolutely magnificent, and so this is the narrative that he wanted to continue, and that he needed her to remember, and this is why he's struggling throughout the entire novel, where she seems to be forgetting this. She seems to it seems to be drifting from her mind. So in a sense, it could have been any other woman. It didn't matter that it was Daisy or Rebecca or Stacy or anybody. What mattered was that someone saw him this way, and since Daisy already had, there's millions of women out there. Gatsby could have had any one of them, but there was something that was attaching him to this, and this is this romanticism of the past for sure. But certainly it was this need that she had already seen him this way, and he needed that reassurance. He wanted this reassurance of her, and it was more for himself. This would be the crowning thing that would fit his narrative, that would put a period to the end of his belief in himself. And so it could have been any other woman. It didn't really matter that it was Daisy or not. So at the end of this, you do realize that the narrator is kind of very sympathetic to him, and shows how at the end of his death, it's very lacking in guests. There's very few guests at his death, and it's this anticlimactic death in which everyone forgets Gatsby. They leave him and they go about their life, and he's completely forgotten. There's that phrase where it says that people were heartless, but also people were heartless, and they did like Daisy and her husband Tom were heartless, and they just went off to different places and forgot about their troubles, and this is the way that they dealt with their problems. And in a sense, yeah, absolutely, they hold the guilt of that. But in another sense, was it fully their fault? Was there some karmic nature to Gatsby's death? Or is there some karmic thing that happened here where he was so self-centered, needed the reassurance of others, that in a way this ended up happening to him? So in a sense, you realize that yes, the American people were heartless and very superficial and materialistic. But in another sense, you realize that they kind of left him because nobody wants to be around someone who is so self-centered that it really is the driving force of their life, and whether they know this or not, or whether they feel this or not. So everybody wants to be remembered. Everybody wants to be the center of attention. And if this is all done for himself, maybe Daisy, wasn't sure about this or not. She still obviously was in love with him in a way, but somehow maybe there was something mature in her that sensed that this was all about him. So in this sense, it's not that she did the right thing or the wrong thing, but she just naturally, everybody wants to be that center of attention. She was given a lot of attention, obviously, but she somehow knew that there was some polluted energy here, that maybe it was just Gatsby, he needed her so much. And why, right? I mean, you should be weary of this in life, or a woman would be weary of this. He needed her so much to be like the reassurance of his value, or of this idea of himself, the special idea of himself. More than anything, we would have to ask ourselves, is Gatsby an original American archetype? Is Gatsby an original American personality of this individual, person who is very centered on themselves and needs that, sees that specialness in them and needs others to see this? Perhaps. So at the end, you see that there's this car accident that happens, and Gatsby is willing to take the blame for Daisy. And this act of taking the blame for Daisy, when it's not his fault, is one of the things that at the end makes him redeemable. Even though he has this entire blot on him where everything is about him, he needs people to see him in this light. This is the driving force of his light. The green light and everything that he sees is somehow a romantic illusion, really. And it's just this mystification. But at the end, he actually acts morally. He actually gives his flesh, he gives himself away, or he puts himself in the line of fire for the sake of love, or for whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But he demeans himself, or puts himself in the line of fire for Daisy. And, it's Daisy's fault. And she, they don't do the same back to him. So this quality, or this act, makes him redeemable at the end, in spite of all his flaws, in spite of all his egotism, in spite of all his self-centeredness and aggrandizement. It makes him redeemable. But you can't really say the same about the other people, about the other characters in the story, except for the narrator, who shouldn't be, I'm not speaking about here, but like for all the other characters, they don't have that quality that makes them redeemable. So at the end, that's one of the things that really makes The Great Gatsby memorable or special. At the end, he is redeemed by this act. Anyways, that was my psychological take on The Great Gatsby. And I hope you enjoyed that, or saw a new light into The Great Gatsby. This is my version of Trimalchio that I have, which I think is good to read as well, because it shows you an unedited, raw edition of the final product that later on was edited further. And this is This Side of Paradise, which was that semi-autobiographical novel of Fitzgerald that will allow you to get more into the psyche of The Great Gatsby and see the parallels between Gatsby and Fitzgerald. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing, liking, and sharing. Until next time.